Welcome to our Fibroid Awareness Month 2023 program, Workplace Strategies for Menstrual Care. Our program today is focused on creating workspaces where women and menstruators are not expected to suffer silently through debilitating menstrual symptoms. The Workplace Reset, like the Fibroid Foundation, has origins in my lived experience and the experiences of our community members. Sadly, it is expected that you'll go to work and smile while clots are passing, while you're bleeding through clothing, and possibly even gasping for oxygen, as I did due to chronic anemia. Our community members tell stories of caring for patients at hospitals while hemorrhaging, the embarrassment of bleeding through light-colored uniforms, and standing all day through painful leg cramping. Today, I'm joined by two women who have made and continue to make meaningful changes in the menstrual health landscape. Dr. Brittany Barreto is the founder of Fem Health Insights and is known as the voice of femtech. She dedicates herself to advancing female, women, and girls' health and wellness through innovation. I've spoken with Brittany in the past. She's a dynamic speaker, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. And Milena Bacalja Perianes is an impact mentor with the UNICEF Venture Fund. She co-founded MadaMe and is the founder of Her Share. She's deeply passionate about gender equality and has partnered with the Fibroid Foundation on menstrual health research. Brittany and Milena, thank you for joining me for this important conversation. How are you both?
We're doing awesome.
Yeah, and we love being here talking about this topic.
It's our favorite.
I am so happy that you're here. So you both are internationally recognized as feminine health advocates. What brought you to this work, Brittany?
I'm a geneticist by training, so PhD molecular human genetics. And I discovered entrepreneurship as my career path. I had way too much personality to work in a lab my whole life. And while working in startups, I then started to work in investing. And that was the time in 2019 that I was mentoring startups, and I came across some women's health companies, and they were telling me what I thought were insane statistics, insane problems that they were solving. And I realized that, I was mentoring other healthcare startups, but they were making the next iteration of a solution, whereas many of the women's health companies were making the first ever solution, or they were innovating on something that had last been adjusted in the 1800s. So, the speculum, right? Hundreds of years old, no one's changed it. Why not? We can totally do that. So that's really when I started to become interested in women's health innovation, also known as femtech. And I wanted to get a job at a femtech fund in 2019, realized there was only one in the world. Okay, I'll get a job at an accelerator. There was none. I said, okay, I'll just find a list of companies working in femtech. Could not find any data on the market size or how many companies were working in it. That's when I realized that our industry had not yet been solidified in a way that allowed us to move forward in a united sense. Instead, we were all recreating the same thing, right? There's a reason why there's over 20 organic cotton tampon companies. It's because we weren't talking, we were not collaborating. And so that's really was my introduction to it. I started with a podcast, Femtech Focus, in March of 2020, because what's a feminist scientist in lockdown to do? She starts a podcast. And I've been talking about menstruation, vaginas, breasts, and female health ever since.
And those voids that you pointed out when half of the world is female is, I'm glad that you explained the background on that, because it's crazy when you think about it.
Yep. Absolutely insane. And I'll just let you know the update version. We have 6 venture funds today with about $150 million under management, which is truly a drop in the bucket, but way better than 10 million that we had 3 years ago. And now we also have 4 accelerators in the world. So we are making momentum.
Truly. And I look back and see how little conversation there was on fibroids and menstrual health when I started too. And it's just, we're making strides. And I think sometimes we don't appreciate the strides that have been made. So thank you for pointing that out as well. So Miss Milena, what brought you to this work?
I'm not an impressive geneticist like Brittany, and my career started very differently. So I'm a gender specialist by trade. And so I started out working in nonprofits in the international development sector, particularly in sexual and reproductive health rights. So working across Southeast Asia and in Africa, and working on issues like child marriage, female genital mutilation, FGM, HIV, really looking at these kind of core issues. And I'd spend time in the field with our partners, you know, with communities, and periods would kind of keep coming up in this kind of weird whispered way. And I kept wondering, like, why is it that we can talk about child marriage and we're talking about FGM, but periods is something that's really awkwardly whispered, and where are these linkages? And one of the things that I guess I came to discover was that actually the onset of menarche, when you get your first period, is the moment where young girls suddenly, their whole life trajectory changes because of what the possibility is of their bodies, right? What periods represent. Sex, babies, sexuality, and everything that kind of comes with that. And suddenly it sort of sparked this journey for me around, well, what if we can start shifting these narratives and these relationships around that beginning of womanhood, which I kind of say in inverted commas, and really start trying to address health issues. And for me, the crux of a lot of my thinking is that if you don't have cycle literacy, which is something you're going to spend 40 years having to manage, then how on earth are you possibly going to be able to understand the rest of your health concerns that come along? Of course, women don't understand that they have fibroids or endometriosis, or don't know how to navigate sexual relationships, or struggle to get pregnant, or struggle to avoid pregnancy, if you don't know that your period is what it really means, right? That there's 4 cycles, right? And so I think all of it became kind of this really kind of key milestone of, wow, right? It's just that women's health is this extraordinary field of sort of untapped opportunities to change the trajectory of women and menstruators' lives. And so I began shifting from kind of development and nonprofit work, working much more with the investment space like Brittany, you know, working with researchers and working with the startup world. And it's just that we need so many different kinds of solutions because there are so many different unmet problems in this space. And I think it's really interesting, Sateria, that you said, oh, now people are talking about fibroids. And that for me is really powerful, that the conversation has really started to shift and expand and understand that every woman has this sort of unique journey and a variety of experiences as they move through their life stages and life cycle. And so we need to be able to understand those as individuals, but then the systems around us, healthcare systems, and as well as sort of, you know, startups and products that we use need to shift as we shift through those life stages. So I wear many hats, as you mentioned in the beginning, but at the core of it is how can women's health sort of be this, you know, critical opportunity to change women's lives. If we can't manage our basic health needs and be healthy, then how are we supposed to go be other kinds of economic, productive, social, you know, beings in the world?
And I always loved your travels. I think that the fact that you've lived in so many countries gives you a very unique perspective on the experience of women and menstruators in many different cultures and settings, which is priceless. And when you talked about FGM, which for those of us who may not be familiar, it's female genital mutilation, which sadly still occurs in many countries. As it relates to menstrual health, there's a stigma that overrides all of those. And it's the stigma that menstruation is bad. And that is something that I'm laser focused on changing the narrative there. I recently signed up for a UN Health Subcommittee webinar, and my intention was just to log on and just listen, you know, just to learn. And the conversation quickly turned to, and I'm not kidding you, how do we make fathers of young menstruators in parts of other countries more accepting of menstruation and not upset about the fact that they now have to incorporate the purchase of menstrual care products into their family's financial plan. And the conversation kind of kept going in that direction. And so, of course, ladies, I had to join in. And I was just appalled that the focus was not on the experience of these young women and menstruators, because the onset of menarche is every woman knows exactly when that occurred in her life and how she felt and the emotions around it and how life changed from that point, because you have a new consideration. Your hormones are changing and you feel sometimes exposed, and there are the cultural and societal pressures. And Milena, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I don't think that we always consider those dynamics, and I want us to really start having more meaningful conversations around exactly those dynamics.
It's not another other women's problem, right? Like that's the thing, is we think it happens somewhere else, and it's very easy to look at certain cultures or certain geographic locations and being like, well, they have these problems. It is everywhere. You can go anywhere in the world and you ask them stories about periods, about their health, about sexuality, and it is the same everywhere you go. Some people maybe have a little bit more information, some maybe have a little bit more access, but everywhere you go, there is exactly what you said: shame and stigma around your period, around your body, around having these conversations, around not knowing where to go. And that for me is why it's a universal problem, but also something, I guess, that draws us all together in a sense of kind of unity and solidarity. The first time I was in rural Malawi implementing a menstrual health workshop, and it was with kind of young women 16 to 25. And I remember them being like, why are you here talking about our periods? Like one of the girls asked, I said, you can ask any question. I said, why do you care about like our periods and our bodies? And I was like, and I told them this, my first story, and they were like, that's what happened to me. And then the girls started opening up, and then they started asking me questions like, what does it look like down there for you? And they were like, well, because you're white, it must look different, or you have something different downstairs. And what color is your blood? And they were asking me these really questions. And then I remember this moment where they were like, oh, it's exactly the same. I was like, it's exactly the same, right? Like our experience of being afraid, our experience of not knowing what to do, you know, trying to navigate this, the fact that like I still struggle with my, you know, my own feelings of like shame or comfort with my body. We're all trying to figure out what's the right product. Like that is so similar to that common core base. And obviously I'm blessed and privileged in many ways that is different from, say, a young woman living in rural Malawi, but the core of that experience is something that anybody can connect over.
Milena, do you think there's any cultures in the world that are doing it right yet or are close to it?
I mean, I wouldn't point to any like culture like, oh, they're really nailing it. Obviously, there is kind of some trends now to sort of embrace, you know, kind of have these like period parties and celebrations, and you hear of these red tent festivals. And I think that's really interesting in terms of trying to shift that narrative to something that is a really empowering experience. But I don't think there is a sort of any cultures that it's just like, oh, you know, these guys have just like, it's always been a super positive and powerful experience. Like I think it's something everywhere where it's so deeply tied to sort of I'm a researcher in this space, right? So there's kind of two things that come out of a lot of the literature is particular stigma around blood and bloodletting, which is culturally, it comes from all over the world. You sort of see it coming to me, what it means to kind of like be bleeding but not have a wound. And I think the second is the fact that it has to do with women's sexuality. Menstruation is about sex and sexuality and controlling women's bodies and the shame there is around it. And that comes from Christianity, Islam, Hinduism. It's in Australia, it's in Nepal, it's everywhere. America, you go. It's not just because you're dirty because it's blood. That is one part of it, but it's because it comes out of the vagina. Women have vaginas, and vaginas are linked to sex. Like that is absolutely central here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that level setting is pivotal. Like I feel like I need to put this on a loop for you know, everyone to hear over and over and over again, because it really gets to the core of how we're connected and why this is so important. And it really points out glaringly that it's shocking that we have to have this conversation in 2023. So Milena, how would you define a menstrual friendly workplace, kind of moving that conversation to women who are older and working but still might have some of the wounds from a horrible onset of menarche and having challenging periods, or just wanting to manage the care of their bodies in a discreet and caring way?
It's a great question. And often when I talk about menstrual friendly workplaces, try to simplify it because I think it's so complicated. Like, what does that really mean? Like, it's actually about being gender sensitive in the workplace. It's understanding that if you're born with the female body or with the potential to menstruate, that your body has different kinds of physical needs. So it's not just about menstruation, but also looking across to menopause, and that women's health is going to have like certain kind of effects. So when we talk about a menstrual friendly workplace, it's like, how do you design your workplace and your workplace policies to understand sort of levels of kind of flexibility? So how is it that you create flexible workplace policies, like whether it's actual leave, whether it's like sick leave, understands that if you suffer from a menstrual condition, you might have severe pain. Even if you don't have a menstrual condition, like around those days, it can be extremely difficult to be physically in a workplace. Your energy levels can be very challenging, to ensuring that your workplace has things like adequate resources in the toilet, right? From products, either free products, paid products, ensuring there's always toilet paper, access to soap and water. So there's sort of these different areas, from how do you either give flexible workplace conditions, so that could be around how you work, when you work, and why you're working, to, I think, particularly around the sick leave and how is that embracing menstrual health conditions as a core part of being considered part of sick leave, to actually like the physical workplace and what's available in the workplace. So, you know, there's a move towards having gender neutral bathrooms, which I think is incredible, but actually gender neutral bathrooms, unless that they're completely closed off and include the wash facilities inside, make it very difficult for menstruators to manage their periods. So things like this around how do you design the bathrooms can be really key to being a menstrual friendly workplace. And then of course the other end is menopause, which I think we have to really be cognizant of, is as women become perimenopausal, it is enormous, the effect on their bodies. And so that's where, even more so I think in some ways than say during kind of your menstruating years, is like, how do you ensure that you have much more flexibility built into how you treat your workers to allow them the support that they need, as if, you know, they had other illnesses or conditions they might be managing. That's not to suggest that menstruation is a condition or that menopause is some kind of like sickness or condition, but it is physically, emotionally, and mentally taxing and costly as hell. And so we should be thinking about how do we support people through that. And if you care about money, it makes them more productive, you know, in beings. And if you care of them as people, it's kind of core to their right to be treated, you know, as a human being with dignity.
Yeah, I think, well, you touched on so much that I would love to highlight. I think that when we think about puberty, I think there's definitely more conversation around that and the changes through puberty and the number of months or years that people have in their minds that it takes. And then you touched on menopause, which we know can last up to 10 years or more through the menopausal transition. And there's been a lot of conversation recently about women who are leaving their jobs through the menopausal transition. The hormonal changes have 40 plus symptoms associated with them. And it's really a lot to grapple with. And I think that your focus on the gender specific needs of everyone in their workspace is really what's key. And I think because also women were not really considered in the workplace initially, that thought, just like with research, like it was mid-80s before, what was it, Brittany, that women were factored into research studies?
Try 1993.
Oh, okay.
So bad.
After I was born.
I was giving some bandwidth. Okay,
Yep.
1993. That's really pitiful. So, you know, that's what we're dealing with right now. And are there, I know, Brittany, I spoke with you earlier, are there companies that are excelling in menstrual health awareness?
Yeah, actually, there are a few companies that I looked up. I recently gave a talk on paid period leave, so I was similarly interested in this. There's companies like Chani. Chani is an astrology app. I actually personally really love it. It's a fun app, and they're doing really well. They're a tech company in San Francisco. They have unlimited menstrual leave, and they said that 60% of their female employees have used at least one day. So if you think about, you know, would our employees, do they need this? 60% at this company have used at least one time saying, I'm going to use a menstrual leave day. You also have companies like Modi Body out of Australia. It's a period underwear, essentially. They give 10 days a year to employees to take, but they actually call it MMM. So menstruation, miscarriage, and menopause. And so they have a policy that says if you just send a message to your manager that says MMM, it's a sick day, there's no other questions. And then it also allows for that diversity of what stage in your female existence are you experiencing that you need time for. Because as we talked about, it's not just the menstruators in the workplace, it's also the menopausal folks in the workplace. I just learned yesterday that the pads for urinary incontinence or fecal incontinence or overactive bladder are different than the pads for menstrual blood. I didn't know that I thought they were interchangeable. I just learned yesterday that like the pads for menstrual blood are not as effective at keeping you dry because they're made for blood and clots versus urine. And I asked, it was a podcast episode, and I said, well, where are the incontinence pads then? And she said, next to the walkers at CVS. And it's like, oh, these women are in their 40s, 30s, and they're having to go to the elder care aisle for their incontinence products. So if we're thinking about products in the workplace, we actually need to actually even expand beyond just tampons and menstrual pads. What about these incontinence products as well? So there are companies doing it. There are also countries that are starting to provide paid period leave. There's several countries in Asia that we can point to, but they honestly, a lot of the citizens of those countries have not utilized it. It'll be very interesting to see Spain, June 1st of this year, Spain passed paid period leave, but it's interesting because you have to provide a doctor's note every time you want to take a day off for it. And so that doesn't necessarily provide a lot of if you're waking up with a really bad cramp, the last thing you want to do is go into a doctor's office to get a note to pass it to your employer. So we'll see how that pans out. But as Milena said, just doing things like increasing the number of sick days that you can take off without question about what it's for, that also allows us to not have to deal with any discrimination laws, because there are males out there who find that to be discriminatory towards them. And I'll leave my opinion out of it. So one thing we can do, though, is just increase the number of sick days without having to ask for what they're for.
Well, for the men who think that's discriminatory, there's a period machine that they can hook men up to.
Yeah.
And I found out that most men didn't make it past level 2, where the women, when it got to like 8 or 10, were like, okay. So I think we should distribute those. I would love to see someone distribute those. And in terms of time off, thinking back, I had been working about 15 years and I had a female boss who also had fibroids. And so she would say, just say you're working from home. And I would be working from home, but I would have access to a restroom. I would be able to put my feet up. I was experiencing serious heavy menstrual bleeding, and it was just really debilitating. And interestingly enough, and I realized that people don't have that flexibility. Like most people working do not have that flexibility. And so I'm very conscious of that fact that people are working and suffering. And that just breaks my heart, because that should not be. And thinking back on the pads, you reminded me, when I filed the patent for the undergarment that I designed, I also filed a patent for the pad that I designed, because I was connecting sanitary napkins together to accommodate my heavy menstrual bleeding. And 2 months after I filed my patent, Procter & Gamble released the exact same pad. So I had to pull back my patent, of course, but it let me know that I was onto something, that, I understood the varying needs. And sometimes when you're suffering with fibroids, you have a fibroid on your bladder. So you have urinary incontinence and you're hemorrhaging, which is a lot of fun. So, but there are various needs, and a lot of our community members, there aren't that many feminine care products that accommodate heavy flow or heavy menstrual bleeding needs. And they do use the pads for urinary incontinence that tend to be thicker. So, there's so much femtech and innovation and needs out there. There are many, many, many strides that we can continue to make. Milena, you were going to say?
I was just going to say that I think the interesting thing is it's not just that menstrual period leave is the solution to this problem, right? So I think the companies that Brittany named are predominantly like high levels of female employment. So in companies where you have high levels of female employment or female leadership, then menstrual leave can be quite effective. If you're just in an average workplace, actually some of the early research is showing that menstrual leave is not used or adopted. There's very little uptake. And that's because if you work in corporate banking, you're not going to go to your boss and say, I've got a hairy period this month, I'm working from home, or can I have more days off? Or, you know what? I just don't want my boss knowing when I've got my period. Like, it's none of their business. So that's why it's not that there's just this sort of one-stop solution, or if you have period leave, women will suddenly take all these days off or it'll be used. It's really understanding around what does your workplace look like and what is the right conditions in the workplace. If you have a very heavily male-dominated workplace, then actually just having a much more flexible workplace policy where you can work from home, exactly as you did, Sateria, or you use those extra sick days, makes a lot more sense. If you're in a workplace like a femtech company, it's a great place to roll out a menstrual leave policy, because everyone's walking around all day talking about their vaginas and their breasts and everything else going on, and there's less stigma attached to how that plays itself out, and people don't have to out themselves as experiencing a certain kind of health issue. People shouldn't have to disclose their menstruating status or any of their health conditions in the workplace to be given days off, or to be allowed to work from home to be more productive.
Understood.
There are some other benefits that employers could offer, if you'd like me to kind of go into them briefly.
Please do.
Yeah. So one is making sure that you have adequate benefits and coverage for your women's health conditions. Again, I gave that talk at a very large multi-billion-dollar company the other day about ovulation in the office and supporting your menstrual working folks. And there was actually a female who put in the chat that she had endometrial surgery, and that their insurance only covered 10% of that surgery. And so I was like, right then and there, y'all, here's an opportunity. Make sure these things that are very, very prevalent, endometriosis is 10% of females have it. It is costing about 20 days per year in lost work. And if you do 20 days per year times 20,000 female employees, that's millions, almost days off of lost productivity. And so just making sure that coverage is available for these things. Free menstrual products, which, by the way, let me give you a statistic here on the cost. It costs on average $240 a year for an individual menstruator to buy their products. This is for United States. For an employer, because if they buy in wholesale, it only costs them $4.67 per year if they provided all the menstrual products for their female employees. So that's $240 per year as an individual, or if your company covered it, $4.67 per year to provide all your menstrual products.
They could charge us back that on do you know what I mean? Like, they could take that off your pay and you'd still be better off.
Literally, that's the next one. Provide a stipend and a marketplace of products and discounts that they can pick from. So again, you don't have to have your HR pick what solutions they think their female employees need. You can just say, hey, we're going to have a marketplace with a wide range of products that we're going to allow you to have a stipend to, a little purse, a discount. Other companies will provide actually paying the subscriptions to apps, such as Moonay is an app that uses audio and neuroscience to actually decrease pain. And so they charge like $10 a month. So what if your employer actually said, hey, the lost productivity is way more than $10 a month, we'll cover your membership. And then the last thing I just wanted to make sure I mentioned is that putting menstrual products in if there's gendered bathrooms, making sure that you have a receptacle in the stall in the men's bathroom, and also providing products within the men's stall. So you think you might be very forward thinking having menstrual products in the men's bathroom, but that could be a very exposing experience for someone who identifies as a man, going in there and grabbing a product into the stall. Put them in the stall. So again, it's just like thinking ahead even more so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great recommendation. And the annual fibroid healthcare costs can go as high as $34.4 billion a year. And many people don't have healthcare. And so if they have endometriosis or fibroids, they have to endure, and they don't have any way of having a treatment to address these symptoms, because the coverage, I mean, the main diagnosis for uterine fibroids, the most consistent and revealing diagnosis tool for uterine fibroids is an MRI. And even with insurance, an MRI is hundreds of dollars. And that is cost prohibitive to most people.
And that's not including the ER visit, the doctor's consultation. I went to the ER 2 years ago. I was having an allergic reaction to a drug I had never taken before, uninsured, and I got like 3 bills. And I was like, I went one time, and they were like, oh, well, this was your entry to the ER bill. This was the ER doctor's bill. And then here was your treatment bill. Oh, okay. Right. So it's usually, it's not even just that test. It's breathing in hospital air that you're paying for practically.
It's really looking at these symptoms. I really like the suggestion about the menstrual care products inside the stall, because you always have to walk out and grab it, or or grab it.
You put, oh, I got it.
Exactly.
Back in.
Yeah, exactly. So Brittany, back to you for a second, and really exploring femtech. How have you noticed the landscape evolving in your experience, and where would you like to see it grow?
Well, first and foremost, when I started my venture into femtech, innovation in women's health, everyone thought I was saying fintech. Oh, fintech? And I say, no, femtech. They say female founders. I'm like, well, predominantly, but that's also not the point. We're talking about female health innovation. And so I would say the first biggest thing I've seen is that people know what I'm talking about now, and they don't question what word I'm saying. So it's definitely, the awareness is absolutely there. And we're also gaining momentum. So some of the factors that we see going into the rise of femtech, because women have always needed healthcare. So why have we not thought about women-specific healthcare before? One of the major reasons is that we have a rise of females in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and medicine, and female researchers are more likely to create products that are for females versus male researchers are statistically more likely to make dual-gendered or even male-specific products. And so we've seen a huge increase in the number of solutions coming out. And when you look back, you're realizing the researchers, inventors behind it are female. 85% of our founders are female. I still have yet to find another industry in the world where 85% of the founders are female. That's incredible. We see 1000% growth in startups in the last 10 years. I mean, talk about a hockey stick. Like, it is just absolutely booming right now. And I would say that it's one of the most undertapped billion, trillion, gazillion dollar opportunity in the world to create sex-specific solutions. I'll give you one quick example. This is, where I really stand is what our mission at Fem Health Insights is to show the economic potential and the investment potential, because obviously just showing pictures of women in pain has not moved the needle on investing. So what we do is we show, hey, look at how much returns other people have gotten from investing, or look at all these opportunities for investing. And so the one example I'll give you is colonoscopes. So when you go for your colonoscopy, females, we are sharing space with our female reproductive organs. So there's actually less space in there. And then also, if you've ever had surgery, like a hysterectomy, and in the most major case, you have a lot of scar tissue there. And so statistically, gastroenterologists are not finishing their colonoscopies in their female patients adequately, because there's just too many twists and turns and scar tissue. And so there's a huge need for a female-specific colonoscope. In fact, most gastroenterologists use pediatric colonoscopes on their patients.
Wow.
You want $1 billion idea? There you go. Like, please, like, the market for that is huge. And so I just feel like I just run around the world waving a flag that says, did you consider sex? And oftentimes the answer is no. And, I think that we're going to move the industry forward with this opportunistic and, hey, what has happened is unacceptable, but we're here now. Let's move forward. And so instead of, if you're a listener and you want to do a program, you want to do an event, you want to give a talk, I encourage you to make it about how thriving this is, the opportunity that exists, right? We can talk all day about all the colonoscopies that we're not conclusive or, incomplete, we can also talk about what biodesign program should we go to and match up those engineers with gastroenterologists, female patients, and MBAs, and create the first ever female specific colonoscope that has a very agile end to it, right? That's where I'd like to sit. That's the conversation I like to have. And that's where we're at.
Wow. Scar tissue can present a lot of issues also when you need a procedure later in life. If you've had several abdominal incisions, whether
I mean,
it's
C-sections, it doesn't even have to be, it's like regular C-section, y'all. That's a major surgery.
That's what I was about to say. C-section or a myomectomy for fibroids like I had as an abdominal incision. I have scar tissue. It took a long time to heal. And I think that those considerations like the colonoscope are just crazy that the colonoscopies have basically been inadequate because they don't have the right tools,
because the tool is based on a male's colon.
Unbelievable.
It's a really shitty situation that we're in.
Oh my God.
Sorry, I had to get that pun in.
And this is why when I talk with her, I'm in tears the whole time.
Look, I actually think it's really interesting though that Brittany, that's the innovation you talked about, I guess for two reasons. One, I think we talk about women's health and we are really centered on women's reproductive health, which is central, but actually we're talking about the understanding that women's experience of conditions that both men and women experience is very different, right? And I think the second is that is really innovative. I think when the sector started, there's 10 million organic subscription tampon services, right? And it's not to say that they're terrible, but it's like actually the industry is really starting to mature to demonstrate what is really novel and what is really kind of forward thinking. There are basic products that we need, but the industry really hits, I guess, a critical point and becomes more investable when we start seeing the kinds of innovations that you're talking about, right? They're game changers for people's health. They're huge money makers, which is really, really critical when you're talking about investment. And so I think it's good that we're really looking at those people who are sort of, I guess, ahead of the game, right? We really do need things that are revolutionary for our bodies and our experiences, and are also really innovative, right? In terms of technology, in terms of the science. So, I met a startup recently and they're growing breasts. Brittany and I spoke about this like for a long time. I was like, is this magic or is this real science, Brittany? And I was like, you've got to explain this to me. But essentially they're using stem cell research to actually grow the breast and the breast tissue on the woman's body, right? And I was like, this is extraordinary for women that have gone through mastectomies, even for reconstructive surgery. So something like this, where it's like stuff like this is like the future of health. Will this particular solution work or not? That will remain to be seen. But that kind of science, that's the next frontier for all of us.
Wow. So Miss Milena, in terms of the VC space, how can potential femme health investors position themselves to provide greater empowerment in this space? And what do you see as the top priorities for investing?
Look, Brittany and I could yell all day long about money in this space. There's not enough money moving into women's health from the public sector or the private sector. So it's unsurprising that private investors are investing when the public sector isn't investing either. When I say the public sector is not investing, they're not investing into the core research that's needed to drive and to justify innovation and private sector investment. And it's not going into the health systems that we need to kind of bridge the gap, right? So we need more money moving from everywhere, and we need that money that's really kind of hitting three core pillars. So we need much better research and kind of clinical research and understanding actually the core factors that are driving women's health, illness, and so forth. We don't understand women's bodies. The amount of times where doctors or scientists will say, we just don't know what the effect is of women's hormonal health, like the female endocrinological system. And so of course it makes it harder to diagnose things if you just don't understand like what levers to pull. So I think that's a core block that we need to see more capital moving into. The second is really around improvements to the healthcare system so that women are diagnosed much quicker around illnesses like PCOS, fibroids, endometriosis, even basic heavy menstrual bleeding and abnormal bleeding. It needs to be cheaper to access these services. Obviously, the US is a complete shit show, but in a lot of countries around the world, I live in the UK, it's a public health system and it's free, and you can still take 8 years to get diagnosed. And that's because it's like a low priority in terms of the overall other issues that they're seeing. So everywhere in the world, the healthcare systems kind of need to get up to speed, and particularly the frontline doctors and nurses and clinicians need to have greater education around what to look for and where to refer people. And then the last piece of the pie is obviously the private investors in this space. So Brittany, what is it? What is it? It's 1.7% of all VC capital. 1.5% goes into femtech. Am I close to the number?
I think it probably is a little, that probably is the number if you're only thinking about healthcare investments. Yeah.
Healthcare investment. Yeah. Of healthcare investment. Sorry. Yeah. So it's tiny. The amount of money is moving. And I think there's a few barriers here. The number one barrier is that the majority of venture capitalists and angel investors are male. So men don't understand those opportunity area. They don't understand the problems. So you need more female investors, but you also need greater education of investors of how big this opportunity is. That's kind of core. I think the second real challenge is, as we said, like the market is still kind of nascent in terms of the solution. So we don't know what great business models really look like in this space. And so we need a lot more research. We need like a lot more elevation of those success factors that helps the rest of the industry understand what the opportunity is. And then I think the third factor is that for investors, they really need to understand like what makes a successful femtech business. So Brittany and I talk about this a lot, but there is money moving, and you have some great, I would say, predominantly female investors, health experts who understand what a great femtech investment is. You now have more money moving in this space from just your average investor, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they're often picking kind of, I'm trying to resist saying shitty businesses, but businesses that will never scale or be successful. And that means that the firm will probably not invest in femtech again because their one investment was a failure. And that's not because necessarily of the startup, because the investor doesn't really understand like what are the critical factors for success, right? You need to be working on health issues where there's kind of a strong social political environment that facilitates access to women's healthcare. You need communities around the innovation. That means that like it helps sort of build that kind of customer adoption and uptake. And that's been really critical to kind of successful femtech businesses, is usually the community building. And then really knowing what's the right business model, because there are a lot of economic factors that play into whether women can afford a product or not afford a product, right? And so really understanding like what is the right business model. You can't just make everything a subscription service in femtech and think, okay, that's going to work. When you're looking at tight finances, you're not going to be paying $20 a month for a subscription to a period platform that only helps one part of your life. And so we need a lot more nuance from the investors, but I think as well from the entrepreneurs around what are the right business models and how do I design a business model that means my business can be sustainable and scalable, because you need that from a financial perspective, but from the perspective of the users, that's affordable and is really responsive to like what their financial earnings look like, what are the other priorities are in their lives, and like when these issues kind of arise, right? You don't need a fertility platform all the time. You need it when you're trying to have a baby. So you really need to be able to build a business that understands your consumer and user inside and out. And that's a lot of information, and Brittany might actually have other feelings as well and thoughts here.
Just that we're talking about menstruating in the workplace. And one of the business models we really see growing right now is to employers, because one of the factors that is motivating the growth of femtech is that women are now 50% of the workforce. And so when you have half your workforce not doing well, not feeling well, bottom lines are being affected. And now employers are starting to say, hey, it's worth the money to pay for this in order to make sure that we are attracting excellent female talent, retaining excellent female talent. And now we have more female leadership as well that's taking these things in consideration. And so if you are a femtech founder wondering who you should charge for your product, maybe employers would be your right option, because women are being asked to pay enough. We females of reproductive age have 80% higher healthcare costs costs than males, because we're doing our pap smears, we're going to get yeast infection meds, UTIs, endometriosis stuff, right? Like we have a lot of other things going on. And so if we can decrease that cost burden on females by asking employers to step up, I think, and I'm very excited about that.
Me too.
It's just bloody difficult for us. Second pun.
This is where I see our voices and the patient voice being a game changer. Because if we demand more expansive care, research, and innovation, we will get it. I attended a health conference here in the US last year, and the women's health segment there were 5 days to the conference. The last session of the last day. This year, there are 2 sessions in the middle of the conference. Might seem like a small move, but I think from the feedback they received and from the presentations given and the need, they're starting to address it in terms of scheduling and time given to discuss the needs of women and innovation in that particular space. But you guys know I love being a rebel and raising my voice for change and finding creative ways to create solutions that make everyone's lives better, so that no one's suffering like I did with fibroids or suffering through another health concern. So it's been really amazing to hear your feedback today. I'm just so happy to speak with both of you and for our community to hear your insights. And I want to end by asking where our listeners can reach you, Brittany.
They can listen to the Femtech Focus podcast on your favorite streaming app. Give it a follow. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter either at femtechfocus.com or femhealthinsights.com. We have a weekly newsletter that we post about the top news stories, resources for founders, but you don't even have to be a founder to follow it. It'll give you all the big talking points that you need for women's health. So subscribe to the newsletter, femhealthinsights.com, and listen to the podcast, Femtech Focus.
Thank you. And Milena, where can our listeners find you?
Check out madame.co to understand better around women's health insights and innovation that's occurring. Or if you're interested in the investment side of things, I recommend hershare.com. I love the way I just forgot my own. Just forgot my own website. Okay. That's always a great way to start the day.
Put the links. We'll add the links. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you,
Sateria. This has been so wonderful. We'll have to do this again because I feel like there's a lot more for us to discuss. And I am so grateful for your energy, your passion, and I see great things moving ahead. We're going to realize our goals. So
absolutely. We're here. We're going. We're moving. This train is not stopping. Like we are full on downhill. Like we're going. But momentum, physics.
Well, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sateria.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this powerful and enlightening program. If you'd like to join us in changing workplace policies, go to fibroidfoundation.org and click on Workplace Reset. If you are facing a menstrual health challenge, you do not have to make that journey alone. We encourage you to reach out to us at our website, fibroidfoundation.org, and we will do our best to help you. Our next Fibroid Awareness Month program will be on July 19th. Join us for an important conversation on the Black maternal health crisis with Olympian Tiana Madison and Dr. Veronica Gillespie Bell. We look forward to continuing to share informative, enlightening conversations that help change the narrative around menstrual health. Together, we are making a difference. Thank you and be well.